my name is Capistrant, and I play the Fujara. And I'm going to teach you a little bit of the basics and kind of just what the Fujara is in general. So, this is the Fujara, and the Fujara comes from Slovakia. And sort of a brief history of the Fujara. So, it came to Slovakia from other countries that had sort of similar ideas of a flute with 3 holes, and kind of based on the overtone series. So the Fujara was used by the shepherds in Slovakia, and they would herd their sheep, and they would play this to calm the sheep. And it kind of acts as a walking stick too, I guess, like a shepherd's staff. And they just played it for the sheep, and now it is recognized as their national instrument of Slovakia. So what the Fujara is it's a fipple flute, basically. And this is the fipple right here. And with a fipple, the air hits the sharp edge right there, and it makes the sound. So another example of an overtone flute, which the Fujara is an overtone flute, but there is the koncovka from Slovakia also. And the difference between those two is usually with an overtone flute, you blow in this end, and you can see there's a cedar block right here, and you have your leather plug, and you would blow through that air channel, which this has a small air channel that goes through if I remove the leather plug, and the wind goes through and hits the sharp edge. And usually you would play it like this, and if I remove the plug, then you could make a sound from it, but that's not how you play it. But with a koncovka, you would play it like this, and you would cover the end, and you would play the overtone series by just changing your air pressure and articulation. But this is way too long to cover with my arm. It's really long. So what they did is they have an air channel right here, this second tube, and you would blow in this mouthpiece, and there's a piece of cork that blocks the end of this because it's hollow all the way through, and the air would go up here, and then it would go through this air channel, and it would go into the block, which has another entrance to the space right here where the leather strip kind of covers, and that air would go through that channel, and it would hit right here, and it makes a sound. And they also added 3 holes so it could play the major diatonic scale, and you don't have to cover the end with your finger. So the next thing is how to hold the Fujara. So what you do is you put it on your leg, the bottom of it anyway, and you put with your left hand and your middle finger on the bottom hole, you put it right there. And what you want to hear whenever you put your fingers on is you want to hear this noise. And that means that you're covering the hole completely. And that becomes kind of a challenge with the thumb, which is the next hole. So you hold it with your thumb on the next hole. You gotta hear that thumping noise again. But since you do it with your thumb, you kind of put it like that. It can be hard for some people to do that at first, but you can do it with practice. So with your right hand in this last hole, you cover it with your middle finger or your ring finger. I guess both could work. I do it with my middle finger. And then you just play, move up and down, and you have to make sure all the holes are covered. So the first thing to make a sound on the Fujara is the fundamental note. And there are 2 fundamental notes, kind of. So the actual fundamental note is really low, and it's hard to hear unless you use like amplification to hear it. But some people use it because it sounds kind of cool, but it's pretty quiet. So that would be an A, and it'd be a lower A than the fundamental that people actually use. So this would be the main fundamental. That's also an A, it's just an octave above. So if you don't cover all the holes correctly, then it'll sound like this. And there'll be air escaping, and you want to make sure that all your fingers are blocking the holes. And a good way of testing that is just hearing that thumping noise with all your fingers. And the next thing to go over is articulation and the overtone scale. So the Fujara is based on the overtone scale. And what overtones are is, so you have a note, and we'll use A for example, because this is an A. And every note has other notes that play on top of it that we usually can't hear. And those are called overtones. And there are ways to amplify them and manipulate them so that you can hear them. And one way of doing that with the Fujara is articulating more sharply for each step of the overtone scale. And the way you want to articulate is by going ta 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 in the Fujara. Because if you just go like ha, and you don't really articulate at all, you just blow into it, and it'll sound like this. And you can't find your notes, and you can't pinpoint where you want to go, and you really need to know that whenever playing Fujara, because each overtone is a different level of playing, and you need to know how to reach the octaves, and it gets a lot harder whenever you get up in the higher octaves if you don't know your right articulation. So if you just use your ta, and what I kind of did there is I kind of just went up the overtone scale. So what you do is you hold down all the holes and you play your first fundamental. And then you articulate a little bit harder to go up to the next overtone. And you should practice doing that. And then you go up to the next octave. So. And from there, you can go up to the next octave. And this is where the overtone scale kind of shows it, because it has a minor seventh, so it sounds kind of like Mixolydian arpeggio, kind of. So it sounds like this. And then that top note, what I did is I kind of did that with so it could have some vibrato, and I'll go over those techniques a little bit later. It just kind of helps the that note. It helps you hit it easier, and it just kind of, I think it sounds better in most circumstances. So you can hear that that minor seventh in there that gives it that overtone scale sound. So what we're going to learn is the first octave, and this is where we start using the holes, because we've just been articulating and hitting the different steps of the overtone scale. So your fingers come into play whenever you want to play the major diatonic scale. So first, you want to play your fundamental. And without changing the air pressure and articulation, you want to move this first finger up. And then that is your second note. And then you go on to your second finger, or your third note. So that would be your thumb. on your third finger, so your fourth note, with your middle finger on the third hole. And then what you want to do after that is you want to go up the scale to where all your fingers are open, and then you close them again to go to the next overtone. So it sounds like this. So that's all the holes closed, but you go to that second overtone, like we were practicing before. So. But you would add the fingers, so you'd go up to the fifth of the scale. And you should use the articulation whenever you're hitting those overtones, or pretty much any of the notes unless you want to slur them. But articulating will help you hit those overtones, so you can always hit the right note and it won't like squeak or go down to another overtone. And that's one of the hard parts about learning Fujara, is just finding your notes. And it's like that with other overtone flutes too. And once you just practice, it's all like intuition. So you just learn by practicing. And a good way to do that is just playing with the overtones and doing something that's called a Slovakian scatter. And what that basically is you just go up the overtone scale, or you start at the top and you play a bunch of high notes as hard as you can, and then you go back down. So it would sound something like this. Or something that I do, it's kind of similar. And you can just practice that and kind of just mess around with the overtones to get that intuition. And if you practice that, you'll get the intuition to be able to play those. So you got the first octave down. So or that would just be the fifth. So the rest of the octave, what you would do is you would go, and right there you would have all your fingers closed. And then you would take up your next finger, and then your thumb, and that would be your seventh. So what you want to do is, after that, you close all your fingers again to get to the next octave. And one thing that some people get confused is on that second octave where you start on your second overtone. So on there, you go from that note, and then you do this one, and then you get to your seventh, and then you close them again to get to that octave. And some people, they'll go and they'll open that third hole, and that will get you up the octave, but it'll have the wrong overtones, and it'll sound kind of weird. So and it's kind of hard to notice, but whenever I play them side by side, you can kind of hear the difference. So the one where I close them all the right way, it sounds more complete because the overtones over that are stacked up in a nice way to make the chord. But whenever you open all of them and play that one, it's the wrong overtones because it's the wrong chord and you're playing it open. Because if you do that, it's kind of just like you're shortening the Fujara and making the overtones different, And you can kind of do a scatter with that and see the overtones. So, and it doesn't really sound as good because you're not really supposed to do that. But so make sure that you close all the holes to get that octave. So here's my fingers up close. And that is your first octave. So the second octave is a little bit more complicated, and some of the notes, some people have like different opinions on how to do them, I think, but this is what I think works best for me. So you start on your second octaves, and what you do is you open your first finger. And then from that, you would think that you would open this one, but that doesn't work. So it sounds kind of like, and that's not the sound you're looking for. So what you do is you actually close all the holes again, because that next note that you want is an overtone that you get in the overtone scale. So it would be, so really you're only using your first finger to do that. And for the next note, you go, and then you open them all again. So it would be your first finger, close, and open all the holes. And then close again to go down, and then repeat. And from there, you go. And then you close all the holes again to get your next overtone. Okay, so it will sound like this. And on this second octave, you're using a lot of the overtones where you just kind of close all together. So for the next note, you'd go. And then open all. And then we're almost done. So after that open one, and these two notes are kind of weird, and I think people had different ideas on how to do them, so there might be some alternate fingerings, but this is what works for me. So it'd be, and then you would hold down this first one. And that is your seventh, or your leading tone. So we're one away from that last one. So. And then your last note is another overtone. So you hold down all your notes, and this one's a little hard to do, but you just kind of, I guess, blow at the right time. And this is where it takes some intuition to kind of know where it is, but So. And sometimes you're going to hit that minor seventh, which is in the overtone series. So it'd be. And that is not in the major diatonic scale. And you can use that with like your Slovakian scatters and all that stuff. But that isn't in the diatonic scale. So if you don't hit that high note, and that's what's kind of scary about it, because if you don't hit that high note, it's probably going to drop down to that minor seventh note, and that's not what you want. So you just a lot of practice, and that vibrato helps me hit it usually. So your full scale would be, or the second octave, or I'll show my fingers. And that is your second octave. So your whole scale would be second octave. And that is almost the full range of the Fujara. So after that, any higher notes are going to be used just from the overtone scale. So the overtone scale actually goes higher, and there's a note where it's a diminished fifth or a tritone that you get up there, and that's just part of the overtone scale as you get higher. And that's a note that's really prominent in the konsovka and other overtone flute music. But since this is lower, you don't really hear it that much. But you can kind of hear the upper overtones once I get past that note. So. And you can kind of hear that diminished fifth with the second and third, and then the diminished fifth. And those notes you can kind of use, I guess, sparingly if you want, because those are a lot harder to hit, and they're a lot more harsh. And it's just, again, it takes a lot of intuition to hit those notes. So now some techniques that I use is, again, the vibrato thing. But you don't only have to use that on the high note. You can use it on pretty much any note, or most of the notes that are in the overtone scale. So. And what I usually do is either I do this with the top one. That usually works, but on some of them, you might find it better to use this middle one. So. Because that one, if you just use the top one, it sounds like. And it might distort to another note. So I like to use that middle one. And so there are lots of sound effects that you can do with your tongue, including just kind of rolling your R's, so like, and more in the back of the tongue where you use more air. It's more of an articulated sound. It's like, and that sounds really cool. And you can use those sounds just like. And with the more articulated one, like, it sounds kind of like, and this is kind of loud, so it's kind of a more dramatic sounding thing. And that, with those, you just kind of hold down all these, and you just just go up and down the overtone scale with doing those. And those kind of sound a little bit like a scatter, and you can just use those in your song. And the Fujara is very good for improvising music. So you can just do like whatever comes to mind and use all those little things, including vibrato and your tongue things. And you can manipulate your air so where it sounds kind of like a swooshing sound between overtones. So and it kind of sounds like a harsh sound, and you can do it at the end of notes and just make it sound more dramatic in your improvisation. And you can do like trills and pretty much anything you can think of, and then you can improvise. So I'm going to improvise something real quick using all the things that I've kind of talked about and the little sound effects that you can do. Okay. So that is pretty much the basics of the Fujara, and I hope this helped you learn the basics of Fujara and how to do all the notes and improvise some. And improvising on the Fujara is really fun, and you just practice, and if you practice you'll get better, especially improvising and all the sound effects and stuff. And I hope you learned something. So thank you for watching, and bye.